This is Caroline. There's a particular kind of invisibility that can settle over a woman's life after a certain age. It's not that people don't see you. It's that they see a finished story, a book they've already read. The cover is familiar, the plot is assumed, and the final chapter is presumed to be quietly winding down. My husband, David, was the primary curator of that story. And for 28 years, I lived inside the narrative he'd written for me. The supportive wife, the competent but unremarkable partner, the woman whose ambitions were supposed to have gracefully retired alongside her youth. He would laugh, a kind, patronizing chuckle, whenever I talked about new dreams. At your age, he'd smirk, as if I'd suggested taking up astrophysics or trapeze. Just enjoy what you have. Why stir the pot? For a long, long time, I believed that chuckle was wisdom. I mistook his complacency for contentment, and his fear for protection. But a quiet voice inside me, one I'd been shushing for decades, started to refuse to be quiet. It didn't want to just enjoy what I had. It wanted peace. It wanted growth. It wanted, with a fierce and sudden clarity, more life. And when I finally listened to that voice, when I walked out of the comfortable, well-appointed cage of that marriage, he told everyone I was having a late-life crisis. A pathetic, embarrassing flail against inevitability. But then months passed, and I didn't crumble. I didn't crawl back. I flourished. And he watched from a distance, utterly confused by the woman he no longer recognized. A woman who was no longer a footnote in his story, but the author of her own. I met David when I was 30. He was 10 years older, established, certain. A civil engineer with a spreadsheet for everything. I was a graphic designer, freelance, passionate but, in his eyes, artistic in that unreliable way. He was a solid ground to my occasional flightiness, or so the story went. I was drawn to his stability. He was drawn to my liveliness, I suppose. Though I've come to understand that for some people, they don't want to live with that energy, they want to contain it. To use it as a decorative accent in their otherwise sensible world. For years, it worked well enough. We built a nice life. A beautiful suburban home. 2 children, Sophie and Ben, who are now wonderful, independent adults. I scaled back my design work to be the primary parent, the household manager, the social secretary. My world became school runs, PTA meetings, decorating, and ensuring David's life ran smoothly so he could focus on his career. My own career became a hobby, something I did for pin money, when the kids were at school. The first real whisper of discontent wasn't dramatic. It was in my 40s, when Ben left for college. The house was so quiet. I looked at my design software, outdated and unfamiliar. I thought about taking a course to refresh my skills. I was excited. I told David over dinner. He put his fork down and gave me that look, a mixture of pity and amusement. Caroline, be serious. The tech has changed completely. Those programs are for 20-somethings working all-nighters. Why put yourself through that stress? You've earned a break. He reached over and patted my hand. You have the garden, your book club. Just enjoy this time. Enjoy this time. It became his mantra. Any flicker of ambition from me was met with it. I suggested turning the sunroom into a proper studio. At your age? The cost, the hassle. Just enjoy the room as it is. I mentioned a friend was starting a small boutique and wanted my help with branding. That's a rabbit hole. You don't want to be tied down. Just enjoy your freedom. My dreams weren't rejected with anger, but with a gentle, smothering paternalism. It was a form of dismissal so soft it left no bruises, only a slow, soul-deep erosion. I began to preemptive him. I'd have an idea and immediately hear his voice in my head. At your age? And I'd let the idea die before it ever left my lips. I became an archive of my former self. My passions were boxed up in the attic with the kids' old toys. My potential was filed away like a project he considered completed and no longer relevant. The catalyst, when it came, wasn't some grand betrayal. It wasn't another woman or a financial scandal. It was something far more mundane, and therefore, far more revealing. It was a Tuesday. I was 57. I'd just come back from a walk, feeling unusually clear-headed. I'd seen a poster for a community college course. Digital design for modern platforms. It started in 6 weeks. A voice in my head, clear as a bell, said do it. For the first time in years, I didn't silence it. I felt a surge of possibility. It was terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, over our customary baked salmon, I told him, David, I've decided to take a course at the community college in digital design. He chewed slowly, swallowed, took a sip of water. He didn't laugh this time. He just looked weary, as if I were a child insisting on a ridiculous fantasy. Caroline, what is this really about? Are you bored? We can plan a cruise. The Alaska one you looked at. This isn't about a cruise, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. This is about me. I want to learn. I want to be relevant in my field again. Your field? He said it with audible quotation marks. Darling, your field moved on 20 years ago. It's a completely different world. You'd be in a class with kids who grew up with this stuff. You'd be wasting your time and our money. Undignified. The word hung in the air between us. It wasn't about the money or the time. It was about his perception of what was appropriate for a woman like me. A woman of my age. Learning was undignified. Striving was undignified. Wanting more than the curated existence he'd allotted me was a breach of some unspoken contract. I looked at him, at his familiar, confident face, at the set of his jaw that brooked no argument, and I saw not my partner of 3 decades, but a gatekeeper. And I realized with a cold, stunning clarity, he was not keeping the world out for my safety. He was keeping me in. I see, I said quietly. I finished my dinner. I cleaned the kitchen. I went upstairs. But something had broken. The final thread of the narrative he'd written had snapped. I didn't see the woman he saw. The aging wife to be managed and placated. I saw a woman with at least a quarter of her life likely still ahead of her. And I could not spend it in this beautiful, silent archive. I didn't leave that night. I wasn't impulsive. I was, for the first time in a long time, strategic. I saw my life as a project I needed to reclaim. I quietly opened a separate bank account, funneling small amounts from the household budget I managed. I updated my portfolio, cringing at the decades-old work, but owning it as my foundation. I reached out to old contacts, my voice shaky on the phone at first. I enrolled in the course online, using my own saved money. I told David I was taking a hobby class at the library to avoid the argument. The deception felt awful, but it also felt like oxygen. The more steps I took in secret, the stronger I felt. A dormant muscle was waking up. It was the muscle of self-determination. The confrontation came when my first course project, a redesign of a local cafe's menu and logo, won a small local award. It was written up in the community paper. A friend texted David congratulations. He came home holding the paper, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. What is this, Caroline? You did this? Without telling me? I tried to tell you, I said, standing in the kitchen, feeling an unfamiliar power. You told me it was undignified. This is what you've been doing at the library. Lying to me? Conspiring behind my back. His confusion was morphing into anger. Not anger at my lie, I realized, but anger at losing control of the narrative. His wife wasn't in the paper. The character he'd written wouldn't do this. I'm not conspiring, David. I'm living. And I can't do it here anymore. Not like this. The conversation that followed was a record on repeat. His arguments were all variations of his theme. It's too late. You're too old. Be realistic. You'll regret it. You're throwing away a good life for a fantasy. He weaponed my age, my supposed fragility, the comfort we had. But the spell was broken. I heard his words not as wisdom, but as the fearful pleas of a man watching his comfortable world change shape without his permission. I'm not throwing it away, I said finally, my heart pounding but my voice clear. I'm choosing a different one. And I'm choosing it for myself. I moved out 2 weeks later. I rented a small, bright apartment downtown. It was a fraction of the size of our house. It had no garden. It was perfect. David's narrative went into overdrive. I learned through mutual friends that he was telling everyone I was having a late-life crisis. A menopausal flight of fancy. He painted himself as the bewildered, patient husband, waiting for me to come to my senses. He expected, I think, that I would fail. That the reality of a small apartment, financial pressure, and the cold world outside his orbit would send me running back, chastened. For the first few months, it was hard. Terrifying. I had moments of sheer panic in my empty apartment, wondering if he was right. But even in the fear, there was an undeniable aliveness. The anxiety was mine. The problems were mine to solve. The silence was mine to fill with whatever I chose. Music, podcasts, the sound of my own bread. And then slowly, a miracle. I began to flourish. Socially, freed from the role of David's wife, I made friends as just Caroline. I connected with women from my course, with other freelancers, with neighbors in my building. My social circle, which had shrunk to other couples from David's world, exploded with diversity and energy. Emotionally, the constant low-grade criticism was gone. The need to filter my thoughts was gone. My self-esteem, which had been a flickering candle, began to burn steadily. I made decisions. Some were good, some were mistakes. All of them were mine. The peace of that self-ownership was profound. Financially, I hustled. I took small, unglamorous design jobs. I learned new skills. My income was modest, but it was mine. The pride I felt depositing my own check, paying my own rent, was a feeling of potency I had never known. I got a freelance contract with a small marketing firm run by a dynamic woman in her 40s who valued my perspective and my work ethic. I bought a new chair for my apartment with my first decent paycheck. I traveled for a weekend alone to a city I'd always wanted to see, on a budget, and loved every minute. I was, by every metric David valued, succeeding. And he was watching. I'd hear from the kids that Dad was confused. That he'd drive by my neighborhood. That he couldn't understand why I wasn't miserable. He'd see photos on social media, which I'd started using for my work. Me at a gallery opening with new friends, me presenting a project, me simply laughing in my sun-drenched apartment. The woman in those photos was vibrant, engaged, alive. She was a stranger to him. About 18 months after I left, he asked to meet for coffee. He looked older, tired. The confident set of his jaw was gone. He'd been living alone in our big, quiet house. The routines we'd had fell apart without me to maintain them. His social life, which had revolved around couples, had dwindled. He was, for the first time, experiencing the loneliness I had felt inside our marriage. He made small talk, then fumbled with his cup. "You look well, Caroline." "I am well, David. Thank you." A long pause. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I see how happy you seem. And I realize I might have been dismissive. I was only trying to protect you from disappointment. The old script. The paternalism. But it sounded hollow now, even to him. I didn't need protection, David. I needed a partner. A cheerleader, not a gatekeeper. He flinched. "I can change. I have changed. I see things differently now. This separation has been hard. The house is so empty." His voice cracked. "Come home. We can try again. I'll support your projects." He said it like he was granting me a royal pardon. And in that moment, I felt the final piece click into place. I looked at this man I had loved and lived with for most of my adult life, and I felt a deep pity, but no pull. No desire to return. "David," I said gently, "I am home." He stared at me, truly not comprehending. "I didn't leave because you didn't believe in me," I continued. "I left because I finally started to believe in myself. And that person, the woman who believes in herself, she doesn't live in that house anymore. She doesn't fit in the life you designed. She built her own." He was the one left behind. Not because I abandoned him, but because he chose to stay stuck in an old story while I bravely, messily, joyfully wrote a new one. He was waiting for his wife to come back, but she didn't exist anymore. I had outgrown her. That was the true closure. Not the divorce papers which came later, but that moment in the cafe. The realization that the power dynamic had completely, irreversibly shifted. He was now the one looking in, confused. I was the one living a life he couldn't fathom. My life now, at 60, is nothing I could have imagined 5 years ago. I run a small but thriving freelance design consultancy. I specialize in helping other second-act entrepreneurs, mostly women who, like me, are launching things later in life. My age is now my advantage. I have wisdom, patience, and a perspective my younger competitors don't. I live in a vibrant part of the city. I have a rich community of friends. I'm dating, cautiously, a kind man who is fascinated by my journey, not threatened by it. I travel. I learn constantly. Most importantly, I wake up every day with a sense of agency. The narrative is mine to write. Some days the chapter is about hard work, some days about quiet joy, some days about learning from a mistake. But the pen is in my hand. David and I are civil. We share our children and grandchildren. He started therapy, I hear. He's dating too, but it's been rocky. He seems to be looking for another woman to slot into the old story, and modern women in their 50s and 60s. Well, we've read that book. We're not interested in being sequels. So if you are listening to this, and you hear a whisper in your own heart that it's too late, that you're too old, that you should just be grateful and enjoy what you have, I am here to tell you something. That whisper is not wisdom. It is fear. Sometimes it's your own fear. Often it's the fear of others, projected onto you because your growth threatens their comfort. It is never, ever too late to become the author of your own life. Your age is not an expiration date on your dreams. It is a reservoir of experience you can draw from to make those dreams smarter, richer, more yours. Leaving wasn't about him. It was about a fundamental choice. To stop being a supporting character in someone else's story, and to pick up the pen for my own. The most radical act of my life wasn't walking out the door. It was walking into myself. He thought I was too old to start over. But starting over wasn't about age. It was about courage. And that is ageless. Don't be afraid to leave behind the person others think you are supposed to be. Don't be afraid to become the person you were always meant to be. The view from here, from the other side of fear, on the page of your own making, is more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. Your next chapter is waiting. You are the author. If you want to hear more story like this, please like the video and subscribe the channel. Hit the bell icon to get notified.